thank you. And thanks very much to Anna and everybody here for inviting me. So I'm Rachel Payne, I'm a Professor of Geography at Newcastle University, and we did this piece of research, which is very similar, actually has some very similar findings as well, between January and March in 2022, and it was with the Safer Streets funding channeled through Northumbria Police, OPECC. So I've been working myself on violence against women for a long time, and I actually did my PhD on women's fear of safety in public spaces in the early 1990s. And sort of coming full circle, I worked on domestic abuse for many years, but coming full circle to look at violence in public places was sort of really crushingly disappointing, really, because what's changed? Well, nothing's changed, as we've heard. In some senses, everything's changed. We have a different social and cultural context. You know, we've had the Me Too movement, and I think, you know, there are some things that we can point to that are really positive, and for me those are what I hear from the women and girls that I work with and speak to. And that's a greater willingness, at least, to share those experiences with each other. But also a great deal of anger now. And we really heard that from this research, you know, just absolute fury from participants that this is still going on, you know, that it seems to be getting worse. It's really difficult to say that in an evidence-based way, obviously, in this field, but I think it is getting worse, actually. Certainly in public space, as Rachel was saying earlier. And that anger, you know, which is kind of in addition to the fear of crime, as we've always sort of conceptualised it, I think is a positive, because I think, you know, it will lead to change eventually. So, parks are not the problem, clearly, but parks can be part of the solution. And violence and fear for women and girls are really everywhere. So as well as focusing on parks, what we did in our research was try to sort of think about what safety means. And this word unsafety has become sort of naturalised, the default, if you like, through academic research like my own, also through policy making and policing, and through the securitisation of public spaces, which isn't really helpful at all for many women and girls. And we don't often ask what is safety, so what we're aiming at, what does that look like, and in particular who's it for, and how best to achieve it for everybody. And I guess I'd like to sort of start from the point that Anna came to towards the end, talking about the research in Leeds, which is that point about intersectionality. I find it really difficult always to talk about women and girls, you know, and to describe what safety is like for women and girls, or what unsafety is like in one breath, because obviously as women and girls we are all also very different. And so for us in doing this research, we had to consider violence against women and girls alongside class, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism and ageism. So misogyny is actually quite rarely just about sexism. So these things not only work alongside each other, but they're part of each other as well. So, enough waffle. In terms of what we did, it was in the northeast of England, which you may be familiar with, and across these 6 local authority areas, so Northumberland being very, very rural, and the other local authority areas being more urban. The methodology involved a big literature review, some park observations in Newcastle and Gateshead's largest parks, and that included what we've called 65 street interviews, even though they were in parks and not on the streets, an online survey, we got 428 respondents, and then 6 focus groups with sort of interested, relevant organisations, activists, including people who used and worked in parks. Also some interviews with Friends of Parks groups, and then we had a steering group of 6 young women, but it wasn't a deeply participatory project. And I'll be talking more about methodology tomorrow morning. And then we've written a report, which is available to anybody who's interested in it, but also this Safer Parks design standard, which had some sort of very similar findings to the ones that Anna has just described, and also drew on Make Space for Girls work as well. So I'll say a little bit less about that. I'm going to try and focus on the things that I think are maybe a little bit different. Thinking about parks then as spaces of hyper unsafety, and in the northeast, even the police data, which we know are terrible for representing violence against women and girls, even the police data show that parks are hotspots for rape and sexual assault. And then obviously a lot of these offences are not reported to the police. So we're sort of seeing them as a microcosm of urban fears, unsafety and exclusion. And we think about layers of violence in particular places as geographers. So yes, it's the interpersonal violence, but you know, beyond those kind of very individualised incidents, as I think they often seem to be, we can think about structural and historical violence again. And I would include in that the violence of austerity, actually, and what's happened to the management of parks and the spaces of parks in the last 15 years. Overwhelmingly from government, we've had a criminal justice-led approach to solutions and tending to sort of look at fear and treat fear without resolving safety. And it's very clear from our research that fear is directly related to the risk and experience of violence. So have a quick look at some of these statistics, which again are probably not going to be a surprise to anybody in the room. We asked people about harassment, violence and a set of hate crimes over the last 5 years. You can see there were big differences between men and women, with women sort of experiencing the bulk of incidents. Particularly if you look at that right-hand column, the stats for young people and young women in particular were really, really awful, really high rates of physical and sexual violence in particular against young women. And then when we asked about parks in particular, just over half of the incidents of harassment and bullying had taken place in a park. Around a fifth of all incidents of physical and sexual violence had occurred in a park. And almost a quarter of women who'd experienced violence in the last 5 years said it had happened in a park, compared to just over 1% of men in the study. So we did have men in the survey as well as women. For young people in particular, so they're the group I think that many of us in the room are most worried about. They were more at risk in parks, and then we asked adult respondents what had happened to them before the age of 16 and what had happened to their own children. And again, we have the same kind of patterns coming up. In terms of who feels most unsafe then, not surprisingly, it really matches experiences of harassment, violence and hate crimes really well. So women are the most likely to fear using parks, as we know, but also racially and ethnically minoritized respondents, younger people, as I've said, and also people with a disability were really significantly more likely, first of all, to have experienced sexual and physical violence, and then to say they more often feel unsafe in a park. So again, taking this intersectional approach is important. We did ask people directly whether they felt that their experiences of harassment and violence were motivated by a protected characteristic, so we didn't use that language, but you can see there that a majority did say that the experience was, and obviously the most common one was they thought the incident was motivated by their sex, and that was all women. But also for some it was multiple aspects of their identity they felt was important, and the qualitative data that we gathered was really important here as well. So lots and lots, like an overwhelming amount of incidents reported, which is about who they were as well as just being women. So again, this intersectional approach is really important. So there's these multiple intersecting barriers to accessing urban nature, as Groundwork study in 2021 told us. And that although parks maybe will never serve everybody, at present it's clear that they serve white, able-bodied men most of all. In terms of who feels most unsafe then, not surprisingly, it really matches experiences of harassment, violence and hate crimes over the last 5 years. You can see there the We did have men in the study, as I say, a lot of men contributing to the study. But we also do have a question about where are men in these discussions. It's really important to say that some of those with high fear and precautionary behaviour in parks are men, particularly racially minoritized men and men who identify as LGBTQ. But when we talk to men, there's some sort of quite interesting answers, and this is one of my favourites here. So this guy was in the park, and we said, we asked him about women's safety, and he said, well, when you want to know how the rabbit feels, you don't ask the bear. And I think by that, what he meant was, I don't want to speak on behalf of women. Okay, fair enough. But he was actually there with his 2 daughters, but he didn't have anything to say whatsoever about, their safety or his worries for them. And so it made the rabbit angry, that obviously. But it also raises the question of, what is men's roles in resolving this, recognising it and resolving it. Okay, so on just quickly then to what park users want. And I'll probably say a bit tomorrow in the methodology session about how incredibly difficult it is to get people to think about innovative, new ideas. Like if you have a checklist, and we gave people a checklist, who doesn't want more lighting, right? I think everybody wants better lighting, but, whether somebody really feels at heart that, that's the best way to address these issues, I think needs a bit more digging. So there was, as you can imagine, a fair amount of support for sort of criminal justice-led solutions, but also a lot of people now seeing the holes in this. And again, as Anna's research in Leeds has shown, there's also huge differences between young and old people when it comes to police, the effectiveness of policing. So young people, racially minoritized, queer people, much more likely to see the police as part of the problem. And I think, as time has gone on since we conducted the study, it's sort of easy to see evidence around us that that's the case. But also women being quite cynical and conditional and qualifying some of these sort of technical planning solutions. So instead, the other sort of things that people talked about, and again reflecting the Leeds research, safety is really people, safety is having other people around. Yes, it depends who those people are, but if there is a critical mass, then most people will feel safer. But then secondly, safety is freedom. And part of that freedom is being free from surveillance, being, not having CCTV cameras, not having police patrol in the park necessarily. So it's about, as one person here says, positively encouraging people to use the parks rather than negatively. Not having too much lighting because it's an intrusion into nature, and nature is one of the reasons why we go to parks. And then various comments about police presence and differential risks of police violence as well. Safety is also a collective responsibility. So a lot of women were just throwing the question out, throwing it back, and not wanting to kind of choose from the checklist, if you like. Here, talking about sort of more caring, more empathetic societal responses, attention to structures, attention to the root causes of violence against women, and this notion that we're sort of developing through the kind of academic theorisation part of the research, which is around collective care, that actually women and girls' safety, not only does everybody feel safe if women and girls are safe, as lots of people have said this morning, but actually it is everybody's responsibility to ensure that that happens, and challenging some of the inequalities that underpin lack of safety. So sorry this slide isn't great, I'm realising now, in terms of readability, but women are talking here about dealing with why people commit these crimes, about community-based schemes to educate perpetrators, supporting young people who suffered during austerity, concern for less empowered members of our local community, having support in the outdoor world. So safety, back to that word safety, which I think it's often used to think about individual, interpersonal kind of safety at an intimate scale, personal responsibility, if you like, but it really needs to be reframed as collective. Just like kind of broader feminist critiques of security tend to see violence against women and safety as interscalar, multiscalar rather. So we need a move back to that. Certainly not back to the community safety turn in the 1990s when I was doing my PhD research, which turned out not to be collective and actually to be divisive, and was really critiqued for having a sort of middle-class white bias in terms of the policies that came out, and heavy regulation of young people and undesirable others in public spaces. So we really need to avoid that and think more about what safety means and what collective responsibility is. Okay, stop there.